At Starbound, we like to tell stories the human way, not with artificial slop or AI voices. What's HFY without humanity? So, subscribe if you want to keep it that way. My name is Dan, and let's begin. I know you're all excited to take part in your first academic field research on a death world, but don't forget that under my watch we have 3 very important rules that must always be followed. Instructor Bliak said the moment the graduate students disembarked from the transport ship, his eyes narrowing as he took in individuals from 3 species he particularly distrusted. A Votrix, a Fule, and of course, a human. The research station sprawled before them, a collection of prefabricated structures surrounded by advanced energy shields that created an almost invisible barrier between them and the untamed wilderness of Lab 7. Beyond those shields, the Death World's purple-tinged vegetation swayed in the breeze, and creatures that could tear through normal armor like tissue paper prowled in the shadows. Inside the shields, however, the yellow grass was soft and harmless, the air filtered and safe, and the temperature regulated to comfort most species in the Galactic Academy's student body. Bliak, a bipedal Zor instructor any human might call a stereotypical green alien with smooth emerald skin, elongated limbs, and a head slightly larger than his slender torso, walked deliberately in front of a small Votrix. The creature stood at barely half the height of a typical biped, such as a human, looking remarkably like what ancient human fiction might have called a grey elf, with delicate features, pointed ears, and silvery skin that seemed moisturized or sweaty in the filtered sunlight. Bliak's large black eyes focused on the small male, and as he stared down at the diminutive figure, he remembered a precedent about those little creatures tampering with force fields. 3 years ago, a Votrix student had nearly collapsed an entire shield network because he just wanted to see how it worked. The memory made Bliak's 3-fingered hands clench involuntarily. The first of the 3 rules, Bliak announced, his voice reaching every single one of the students, loud and clear, is not touching the equipment, especially the shield generators that ensure our safety and the generators that keep the whole facility running. This station operates on a delicate balance of power distribution, and any interference could result in catastrophic failure. The small Votrix nodded quickly, saying nothing, but Bliak noticed the sad way he looked at the shields, his large grey eyes lingering on the nearly invisible energy barriers with unmistakable fascination. The instructor remembered that some species were very predictable about their interests and the kind of rules they might break. Votrix were naturally inclined toward technology, their entire civilization built on a foundation of engineering marvels. Asking one not to investigate interesting equipment was like asking a fish not to swim. Bliak moved down the line, inspecting a few students but not paying much attention to most of them since they were from species that followed rules. There was a cluster of Dendari, the tree-like beings who were practically incapable of rule-breaking due to their rigid social programming. Behind them stood 2 Quilnari, non-biological entities who communicated primarily through light patterns and whose concept of rebellion was entirely foreign to their ordered existence. Then he stopped again, this time in front of a furred biped of orange and black stripes with whiskers and a short snout. The female Fule, called Halara, stood with her arms crossed, her posture radiating a confidence that immediately set off warning signals in Bliak's mind. Her species was notorious for their aggressive tendencies, their territorial disputes, and their unfortunate habit of settling disagreements with physical confrontation. Bliak again remembered precedent. 2 years ago, he had overseen a research expedition that ended 3 days early because 2 Fule students had gotten into a territorial dispute over sleeping arrangements that escalated into a full-scale brawl. They had destroyed 2 tents, damaged a water recycler, and traumatized a group of peaceful Quilnari observers who had never witnessed violence before. Addressing the whole class, but keeping his eyes fixed on Halara, he announced, "The second rule is that no fighting is allowed among students, both during the day or during the night, and that includes fighting with or without your retractable claws exposed. Physical altercations will result in immediate expulsion from this program and a failing grade that will follow you for the rest of your academic career." Laura stared around the other students, her whiskers moving from side to side with what might have been amusement. "I don't see any worthy opponent anyway," she said with a shrug, her tail swishing lazily behind her. Bliak felt his jaw tighten, but kept walking in front of the students, passing a group of female avians of vibrant colors. Trill, from the Northern Spiral Arm, known for their artistic sensibilities and mild temperaments, and ignoring them entirely. They would cause no problems. They never did. Finally, he stood in front of a human. The individual, called Neil, stood with a relaxed posture that somehow managed to be both casual and alert simultaneously. His tanned skin hinted to either genetics or excessive sun exposure. He wore the standard student field uniform, but something about the way he wore it suggested a person comfortable in his own skin, unintimidated by authority figures or the dangerous environment surrounding them. Bliak regarded him with the kind of careful scrutiny usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. "The third and most important rule," Bliak said, his voice dropping to a more serious register, "is avoiding all wildlife. And by that, I mean all wildlife." He paused for emphasis, his black eyes never leaving the human's face. "No taming deadly pets, no rescuing six-legged puppies in distress because you don't understand how dangerous they are, no feeding anything under any circumstances, no eating native plants just because you can, which might lead other students to want to try it and die a horrible death." He took a step closer to Neil, lowering his voice but ensuring everyone could still hear. "And most importantly, no provoking the local predators to attack the shields because you want to see what happens. The shield can withstand significant impacts, but it's not designed for repeated assault by creatures that mass several tons and possess claws that can slice through metal." The human laughed awkwardly, looking around at his fellow students before returning his gaze to Bliak. "I guess I'm not the first human who's visited this planet in this research program." Bliak offered no comment, his silence more damning than any words could be. The truth was that humans were simultaneously the most brilliant and most reckless species to join the Galactic Academy. They had an unfortunate tendency to treat Death World fauna like potential friends rather than the lethal threats they actually were. Last year, a human student had attempted to pet what she thought was a cute furry creature, only discovering too late that it was actually a colonial organism of venomous insects. She had survived, but only because Bliak had kept anti-venom on hand, specifically for that kind of idiocy. Turning to address all 20 students at once, Bliak took a deep breath and delivered his standard opening speech. "You might be used to the soft instructors of the Galactic Academy with their gentle encouragement and their flexible deadlines, and their understanding attitudes towards creative interpretation of guidelines. But during this week that you will be staying here under my protection, collecting samples and conducting research, these rules are absolutely everything." He gestured toward a small prefabricated building at the far end of the compound. "I have a special place for those who break these rules, a place where they will not enjoy staying as they wait for transportation that will take them back with their failed grades. It's not comfortable, it's not pleasant, and most importantly, it's not a place where anyone wants to spend time contemplating their poor life choices." Taking another deep breath, Bliak felt he had sufficiently established the gravity of the situation. "Now that I have given you my warnings, you're all free to move your luggage to your individual tents. And with that delayed but sincere sentiment, welcome to Planet Lab 7. He turned his back on them, intending to return to his own research laboratory, but his sensitive hearing picked up the conversations that immediately erupted behind him. "Didn't feel very welcomed," Laura commented, her voice reaching easily and clearly across the compound. The human just laughed, and Bliak could hear the soothing quality in his voice as he responded. "That guy might have some rough experiences with our species before, but I guess we should give him the benefit of the doubt. First impressions aren't everything, right?" Even the little Votrix chimed in, his voice smaller but still audible.
"I don't even like tech that much. Well, I mean, I like it a normal amount. I don't get why the instructor singled me out like I'm some kind of equipment saboteur."
Bliak heard nothing after that, having deliberately tuned out their chatter as he made his way back to his laboratory. He had work to do, experiments to monitor, and data to analyze. But more importantly, he was ready to return in the afternoon for a surprise inspection after they had settled into their tents to make sure none of them were planning to break the rules on their very first day on this planet. Some might call him paranoid. He preferred to think of himself as experienced. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the compound as Bliak prepared for his inspection. The moment the autonomous systems notified him that the students had settled down in their tents, he decided to forget his experiments and go outside. He pulled up the holographic interface from his wrist implant, assessing the AI that managed the station's extensive sensor network. "Show me any anomalies with the shields, any fighting, and any interactions with wildlife," he commanded, his fingers moving through the air as he navigated the data stream. The AI responded in its neutral, pleasant voice, analyzing the last 4 hours of recorded data. "Specifically," Bliak added, "check if the Votrex has done anything suspicious near the shields, check if the Fule has challenged any other students to confrontations, and check if the human has put everyone in danger by interacting with native creatures." The AI processed for a moment before responding. The Votrex, designated as Student Rilnik, has not approached the shield perimeter at any point. Student Halara has engaged in no physical altercations or challenges. Student Neil has not interacted with any native wildlife. Bliak felt his suspicion deepen rather than diminish. Those kinds of students didn't just behave themselves. Something must be wrong. Perhaps they were planning something more elaborate, something the sensors hadn't detected yet. He proceeded toward the open area where the tents had been erected, following the winding path through the compound. For just a moment, as he crested a small rise, he appreciated the perfect rows of tents spread out before him. Each one was properly secured, properly spaced, and properly oriented according to standard field research protocols. At least this batch of students knew how to be organized. But moments later, all he felt was deep, burning hatred for the scene in front of him. Every single student was gathered around a bonfire. The fire itself was substantial, built in the traditional triangular configuration that humans seem to favor, with flames reaching nearly 2 meters high. The wood crackled and popped, sending occasional sparks drifting up into the evening air. The human sat on a folding chair, holding an instrument that Bliak's implant translator classified as an acoustic guitar, his fingers moving across the strings as he sang something about Lucy in the sky with diamonds? Whatever that meant. Every single other student was paying attention. Some were eating their rations, the standardized nutrition packs that the academy provided for field research. Others were simply enjoying the heat of the fire, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. But even the theoretically well-behaved species, like the Trill avians, were gathering around that pile of burning wood, swaying gently to the human's music. Bliak approached suddenly, his footsteps heavy with disapproval. "What is going on here?" His voice cut through the music like a blade. The human stopped playing, his fingers still on the strings. He looked up at Bliak with an expression of innocent confusion. "Oh, hey, Instructor. We were just having some fun to acclimate with the planet. Tomorrow's going to be all about collecting samples and assisting you with your research, so we figured we'd take tonight to get to know each other and relax a bit." "The fire," Bliak said, his tone making it clear this was not actually just a question. "Where did you get the wood?" His gaze snapped to the Votrix, who seemed to shrink under the attention. "Did you make a hole in the shield so your Death World friends could go outside and collect wood?"
"No,"
Wilnick squeaked, his grey face somehow managing to look even paler.
"We didn't go outside at all. There was a tree with a few dead branches inside the safe perimeter. We just collected those. We didn't break any rules."
Bliak knew he couldn't actually accuse them for anything without proof. The sensors would have detected any shield breaches, and the AI had reported no anomalies. But he still found a way to frame this as a violation. "Wood," he said slowly, enunciating each word that followed with a voice of authority, "is part of the local wildlife. Burning it is a form of interaction with that wildlife. Therefore, this means you are violating the rules I informed you about just hours ago." He raised his wrist and activated his implant's control interface. Moments later, 3 utility drones descended from their charging stations, their engines glowing as they approached the bonfire. The students began to realize what was about to happen, but before anyone could react, the drones opened their reservoirs and dropped approximately 300 liters of water directly onto the fire. Students scattered in all directions as water splashed everywhere, extinguishing the flames instantly and creating a massive cloud of steam. Several students ended up with their feet soaked from the excess water that spread across the ground. The droll avians shrieked in dismay as their feathers got wet, and even the normally stoic Dendari looked disturbed by the sudden deluge. "Today's misbehavior will result in a warning," Bliak announced over the chaos. "But the next time, it will risk your grades and your permanence at my research station. Do I make myself clear?" For some reason, even the well-behaved students were looking at him strangely now. The Troll were whispering among themselves, their melodious voices vaguely hinting notes of disapproval. The Quilnari had shifted their light patterns to colors that Bliak's translator suggested meant concern or possibly disappointment. The human just laughed, though there was less warmth in it now. He carefully placed his musical instrument in a protective bag and looked up at Bliak with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We won't violate any rules anymore, Instructor. You have our word." Something about the tone felt like he had just said the very opposite of what his words promised, but Bliak couldn't quite articulate why. He simply turned and retreated back to his laboratory, satisfied that he had established appropriate boundaries. But somehow, concentration eluded him that evening. His experiments seemed less interesting, his data analysis less engaging. His mind kept drifting back to the scene of the students gathering around the fire, to the way they had looked at him after he extinguished it. Around midnight, he made a decision that was not normal for him. He would conduct a night inspection, just to be sure, just to verify that they had learned their lesson. He arrived at the tent area to a sight that left him speechless. The human was carrying a giant fish. Bliak stopped dead in his tracks. His 3-fingered hands froze mid-gesture. The fish was truly enormous, easily 1.5 meters long, its body thick and muscular even in death. Colorful scales covered its body, creating an almost hypnotic display of blues, greens, and purples that marked it as native to Lab 7's nearby river. The creature's mouth hung open, revealing not just rows of sharp teeth, but 3 rows of them, each curved backward like hooks designed to prevent prey from escaping once caught. This was a Karvesh River predator. Bliak recognized it from the station's wildlife database. These creatures were classified as Class 4 hazards, aggressive ambush predators known to attack anything that entered their territory. They could detect vibrations in water from 50 meters away and strike with enough force to break bones. which meant the human had gone outside the shields. Outside, in the death world proper, at night when the most dangerous predators were active, into the river system where visibility would be nearly zero and threats could come from any direction. Bliak felt something cold settle in his chest, a mixture of fury and something uncomfortably close to concern. The human was soaking wet, his clothes clinging to his body, water still dripping from his hair onto the yellow grass. There were scratches on his forearms, shallow cuts that could have come from rocks or underwater vegetation, or from the fish itself during the struggle to land it. "Are you insane?" The words came out before Bliak could stop them, his voice rising higher than he intended. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" The Votrix had prepared what looked like an electric heat source, a portable cooking unit that must have come from someone's personal luggage. But he stopped setting it up, staring at Bliak with wide eyes. The other students had formed a loose circle around the scene, and Bliak could see their expressions shifting from excitement to uncertainty as they registered his reaction. Every student was watching, their attention fixed on the human and his catch, but now also on Bliak himself. Some looked excited, others curious, but all of them were clearly invested in what was about to happen next. Several datapads were out, recording lights glowing softly in the darkness. Neil set the fish down carefully on a clean top that someone had laid out, treating the massive creature with an almost reverent care. "I went out for a trip and came back with dinner. Just that." "Just that?" Bliak's voice came out strangled. "You went outside the shields, into a Class 4 hazard zone, in the dark, into water where you couldn't see threats approaching to catch a predator that kills for a living." He gestured at the fish, his hand shaking slightly. "That thing could have taken your arm off, or dragged you under and drowned you, or attracted other predators while you were vulnerable." The human had the audacity to shrug, water droplets flying off his shoulders. But it didn't. I was careful. I studied the wildlife database, waited until I could confirm there was only one in the immediate area, used proper technique. There are no proper techniques for going into a Death World river at night, Bliak shouted, his composure finally cracking. The shields exist for a reason. The safety rules exist for a reason. What you did was... He struggled to find the words adequate to describe the sheer recklessness of the act. The casual tone, the innocent expression, the complete lack of acknowledgement that anything might be wrong. It all combined to make Bliak's blood pressure rise. But underneath the anger was something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like relief that the human was standing there alive and whole. And also a growing desire to punish this human for this reckless behavior. Did you? Bliak said slowly, forcing his voice back under control. Just admit to having violated my rules? Well, Neil said, and there was something in his voice now, something calculated. You mentioned taming creatures, rescuing six-legged puppies, and eating plants. You didn't say anything about hunting or fishing. He paused, and Bliak could see the exact moment the human deployed his prepared argument. That's a bit of a loophole in your rules, you know. I mean, technically, stepping on this yellow grass is a kind of interaction with wildlife, so I thought that fishing existed in a gray area. You said to avoid feeding wildlife, but if I'm removing wildlife from the environment, that's kind of the opposite of interaction, right? Bliak noticed that the human had maliciously interpreted the rules and was now abusing the technical details. His three-fingered hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles went pale green. He intended to punish the human immediately to make an example that would prevent any future creative interpretation, to throw him in the isolation unit and have him shipped back to the academy with a failing grade and a permanent mark on his record. But then he noticed that every other student was staring at him, waiting to see what he would do. The Trill were recording. The Kulnari had shifted to colors that his translator couldn't quite pass. Even the Dendari had leaned forward slightly, their bark-like features somehow conveying intense interest. Several of them were clearly recording him with their personal devices, their implants glowing as they captured audio and video. This could result in a complaint with the Academy. Instructor punishes student for successful hunt on designated research planet. The headlines would write themselves, especially if he couldn't point to a specific rule violation that was clearly spelled out. Especially when the human was standing there, alive and successful, with enough food to feed the entire camp. He realized he wouldn't be able to do what he wanted, at least not in the direct way he preferred. Bliak looked at the fish again. It was an impressive catch by any standard. The kind of catch that required skill, courage, and no small amount of luck. And that, Bliak realized, with growing frustration, was exactly the point the human was making. Instead of punishing the human directly, he addressed the entire group, carefully keeping his voice level and controlled. No more creative interpretation of my rules regarding interaction with wildlife will be allowed. From now on, anything other than stepping on grass will be a reason to lose grades. That includes hunting, fishing, collecting, observing at close range, or any other activity that involves native organisms. Are we clear? None of them replied immediately, which was its own form of defiance. I said, Bliak repeated, his voice harder. Are we clear? A few murmured acknowledgements filtered through the group, grudging and minimal. Bliak was forced to retreat for the night, knowing he had lost some kind of battle he didn't fully understand. As he walked away, he heard someone, probably the Fule, whisper, "That's going to be delicious." He didn't look back. The next day, Bliak woke to the distinctive harmonic sound of the shields being tampered with. He didn't even think before putting on his work shoes, not bothering to change out of his sleeping garments, a simple grey tunic that hung loosely on his frame. He ran straight towards the Votrix tent, his mind already composing the disciplinary speech he would deliver to the little tech-obsessed creature who had likely surrendered to instinct and done what all Votrix eventually did. The moment he got close to the tent, ready to snap and punish, he noticed that the noise was not coming from the shields at all, but from inside Rilnik's tent. Confused, Bliak opened the tent flap without bothering to announce himself. Inside, sitting on a small shelf, was a portable speaker device that was playing something equivalent to shield failing noises at maximum volume. The sound was perfect, a precise recreation of the harmonics that shield generators made when they were being tampered with or failing. Bliak stood there, staring at the device, trying to understand what was happening. Then laughter of various species suddenly erupted around him. He spun around to see that the students now surrounded him, some looking out from inside their tents and laughing, while others had clearly been waiting outside for his arrival. The Votrix approached, his grey face split by a smile that showed small, neat teeth.
"Can I have my speaker back, Instructor?"
Rilnik asked politely. Bliak stared at him, then at the device in his hands, then at the gathered students. Why were you playing that annoying noise on your music device? Rilnik's expression became one of exaggerated innocence.
"Oh, I can only relax with that particular sound playing. It reminds me of home, you know, the power grids that make similar harmonics. I didn't know there was a rule against playing sounds in my own tent."
Obviously lying, Bliak thought. But the truth didn't matter as much as the realization that what the human had done yesterday with the exotic dinner might have given ideas to the other students. He was in for a long week.
He opened his mouth to tell them that there was now a rule about loud sounds when suddenly one of the supposedly good students, a trill with brilliant blue plumage, asked in a voice of innocent curiosity,
"Instructor, why are you in your sleeping clothes?"
Bliak looked down at himself, at his grey sleeping tunic and bare green feet, and suddenly lost the willpower to punish anyone. He stormed off toward his quarters, calling back over his shoulder, "We'll discuss new rules later." The laughter followed him all the way back to his building. He informed every single one of the students by message that speaker devices louder than a data pad were not allowed anymore, effective immediately, with violations resulting in grade penalties. It was only on the morning of the third day that another incident occurred. Bliak woke again with the noise of Fule vocalization, the kind of display he remembered from memory when their species was about to get into a fight. The sounds were distinctive, low growls mixed with high-pitched yowls, the kind of vocalization that preceded serious physical confrontation. Bliak at least remembered to change clothes this time before rushing outside toward the tent, where he expected to finally send someone back home in shame for breaking the rules. He marched toward Halara's tent with grim satisfaction, ready to catch her in the act of fighting with another student. The moment he opened her tent flap, there she was with the human inside. They were lying side by side on sleeping mats, looking at a datapad together. The Fule vocalizations were coming from the datapad speakers, apparently part of some kind of recording. The other students were all laughing behind him again, clearly having anticipated this exact scenario. Halara and the human stood up, their expressions showing amusement rather than guilt. Halara stretched lazily, her claws extending slightly before retracting. "Is there going to be a rule against sharing species vocalizations too, now, Instructor? Because I was just showing some traditional Fule hunting songs with Neil. They're culturally significant to my people." Bliak said nothing. He simply turned and stormed off, realizing that the students were provoking him without actually breaking the rules, and he didn't know how to react to it. They were smart, annoyingly, frustratingly smart, and they were working together, which was somehow worse than individual rule breaking. 2 more days passed in a series of increasingly creative provocations. On the 4th day, multiple students came running to report that the human had tamed a local predator and was keeping it in his tent. Bliak rushed over, his mind already preparing the expulsion paperwork, only to discover that the predator was a hologram projector displaying a 3-dimensional image of one of the local carnivores. Neil had even given it a name and was pretending to feed it simulated food. Now, there's no rule against holographic pets, the human pointed out cheerfully. On the 5th day, Bliak woke to find that the ceiling of his laboratory was covered in excrement. The Trill avians had apparently decided to express their disapproval of his teaching methods in the most direct way their biology allowed. When he confronted them, they responded in perfect harmony. "You never established rules regarding where we are allowed to perform necessary biological functions, Instructor. The facility guidelines only specify designated waste areas for terrestrial species." They weren't wrong. He had never ever considered that flying species might need different waste management protocols. By the afternoon of the 5th day, Bliak realized he had lost, not in any single confrontation, but in the larger war of wills. The students had united against him, finding loopholes and creative interpretations that technically didn't violate his rules while absolutely violating their spirit. He called a general assembly in the common area. 20 pairs of eyes watched him, some curious, some defiant, some cautiously optimistic. Even the Dendari, who normally stood apart from social dynamics, had moved closer to the main group, showing solidarity with their fellow students.
I would like to propose a truce,
Bliak said, his words feeling strange in his mouth.
I will give you all fair grades for your research work, which has been adequate despite the various distractions, in exchange for no more creative interpretations of the rules for the remaining 2 days of our time together.
Neil stood up, serving as what appeared to be the unofficial spokesperson for the group. That seems reasonable, Instructor. We came here to learn, after all, not just mess with you. He paused, then added, though I think it's worth saying that your rules might have been a bit too broad and restrictive from the start. Bliak wanted to argue, but he found he couldn't.
Maybe,
he admitted grudgingly.
The last 2 days will be peaceful research work, with no more pranks and no more rebellious behavior. Agreed?
Agreed, came the chorus from 20 students, representing a dozen different species. And surprisingly, they kept their word. The final 2 days were remarkably peaceful and productive. The students carefully collected samples, assisted with Bliak's research projects, and even showed genuine interest in his work, studying the unique electromagnetic properties of Lab 7's mineral deposits. The Votrix never went near the shield generators, but asked thoughtful questions about their engineering during a presentation. The Foulet engaged in no physical confrontations, but demonstrated impressive discipline during a challenging sample collection from a steep ravine. And the human didn't interact with any wildlife, but did share his surprisingly extensive knowledge of Death World ecology during evening discussions. On the final evening, as they packed their equipment and prepared for departure, Neil approached Bliak privately. "Hey, Instructor," he said, his tone more serious than Bliak had heard before. "I wanted to apologize. We pushed back pretty hard, and while I think your initial approach was too harsh, we probably could have handled it more maturely." Bliak considered the human for a long moment.
Why did you push back at all? Why not simply follow the rules?
"Because they weren't really rules," Neil said. "They were restrictions based on stereotypes. You looked at Rilnik and saw a Votrix who would break equipment. You looked at Halara and saw a Foulet who would fight. You looked at me and saw a human who couldn't control their desire to pet something fluffy. You didn't see us as individuals. You saw us as problems waiting to happen."
"That's because you are problems waiting to happen,"
Bliak replied, but his words lacked conviction.
"Your species have track records."
"So do all species," Neil countered. "Even yours, I'm guessing. But you can't teach effectively if you start from a position of assuming the worst in your students." Bliak had no response to that. He watched the human walk away, then turned his attention back to the departing transport ship. 3 weeks until the next batch arrived. 3 weeks to decide if he would greet them with the same speech, the same assumptions, the same certainty that he knew exactly which student would cause which problems. He pulled up his standard rules document on his holographic interface, stared at it for a long moment at the 3 rules, and then, almost against his will, hit delete. Bliak stared at the blank screen for another moment, then saved the empty document. Tomorrow, he would start fresh. Tonight, he was happy just to admit he'd been wrong.